Good evening and welcome to this live-streamed virtual town hall with your state lawmakers from the 40th Legislative District, Senator Liz Lovelett, Representative Debra Lekanoff, and Representative Alex Ramel. My name is Courtney and I'll be your off-camera moderator for the evening. This event is an opportunity for your state lawmakers to answer your questions about the 2021 legislative session, which adjourned just a bit over a week ago. We sent out a quick survey to residents of the 40th District, and we have compiled those questions along with some others submitted directly to the lawmakers. And this evening, your lawmakers will be answering those questions. You can also submit any questions you have throughout the live stream in the comment section of whichever platform you're watching from. With that, we'll get things started. I'll turn it over to the lawmakers for some quick opening remarks, starting first with Senator Liz Lovelett.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and welcome everybody to our town hall tonight. It was a really exciting and historic legislative session. We have so much to be proud of in Washington State for the way our lawmakers came together. We had 334 bills that passed, of which 310 passed with at least some level of bipartisan support in one or the other chambers. And what I think that really speaks to is that we wanted to come together as a team to solve really big problems around COVID response, around police reform, housing, access to services and healthcare, and we came together and we delivered for Washington State. So I'm proud of the work that our delegation in the 40th District has done together as a team, the way we have watched out for each other's policies and budget requests and advocated for the needs that are deep in the 40th, like ferries and climate protection. I'm very proud to be part of this team and looking forward to answering some of the questions that you have submitted tonight and ongoing dialogue as we move through the interim. Thanks for being here. I think I turn it over to Representative Lekanoff.
Let's see, am I off mute? Great, it's so good to be here with my friends. It's great to see you, Alex. It's great to see you, Liz. I tell you, we have made it out of an incredible legislative session. And as my friend Liz says, it's been historic, it's been monumental. The wingspan of topics that we covered has just been something to where I paused and I looked at my 17-year-old daughter and I know you both, Liz and Alex, have your little ones. And I said, I can't believe we survived it. 120 days of in virtual Zoom, of children running back and forth, dogs barking, food, burning in the background, people knocking at the door, the mailman showing up, yoga pants. Thank God for pajama and yoga pants. But in all seriousness, wow, we had some great monumental moments from climate change to transportation, education, public safety, during a time of a COVID crisis, during the time of an economic crisis, and during a time of when we are recognized that every color matters and that equity and diversity is important to Washington State. I'm proud to stand with our legislature on both sides of the aisle and to my friends on the other side of the rhododendron to stand up and rise and say, we in Washington State are going to pass bills that impact every kitchen table. We're going to pass bills that impact every person. And we're going to pass bills that make sure that everyone feels like their families, their communities are being taken care of. And the 40th stood strong together. And I'm really excited about this upcoming 22. They know me. I'm already excited and thinking about the next bills. And we'll talk about that later on today. And I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thanks, Deborah. And thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate the chance to report back on what we've been doing as we work to carry your voices and your values to state government. As my colleagues have already said, we started off this year with really historic challenges, and that started off with, of course, the pandemic and trying to do everything remotely. At one point last fall, I asked the Speaker of the House, what are your goals for this next legislative session? And she said, if we can just get everything done and pass the budget and nobody gets sick, that'll be a success. Proud to report we got a fair amount more than that done. As Liz said, more than 300 bills passed. As we mentioned in the last town hall, our top priorities as a caucus were confronting the public health crisis, the economic recovery, addressing racial injustice and confronting the climate crisis. And I think we made major steps on all of those topics. Looking forward to digging in on the details of those bills over the course of this next hour. But I think this is going to be a legislative session that folks look back on, and we can be really proud of what we did. I'm proud to be part of this team with Liz and Debra. Proud of our colleagues, Amanda and Jordan, and Kaylee, who have done so much work to help us throughout, and our other representatives from the Pacific from the Northwest corner here, in the 42nd and the 10th district, who really just get all of this work done and tag team all of the different bills that we had to look out for this community. I guess I just would love to, looking forward to the conversation and being able to share how we've carried this community's values to the state government. And I guess I turn it back over.
Great, thank you all so much. Now we can get started with some questions. These first few were submitted in advance of the event. First, what were your experiences like with the remote session environment? Did you see benefits, challenges, or what do you think future sessions will look like? And if anyone in particular wants to start, you can go for it.
Well, I'll dig in. I found a lot of benefits and challenges. Normally this delegation has to move to Olympia for most of the session in order to complete the work. And so this year, to be able to be in my own home, and especially at a time when my kids were navigating first fully remote and then hybrid school, I was really grateful to be able to be home with them during that time. But it is very challenging because so much of our work has to do with the relationships that we have and we build in Olympia, both within the membership of the legislature, but also with staff and advocates in and out of Olympia. And, at the end of our long days where we're in committee hearings and various meetings, stakeholdering the bills that we have, for all those conversations that we might have with other members that we might have in the hall, walking to and from places in our offices, or an opportunity to share a meal together, that was another 15-minute phone call to schedule and another 15-minute phone call to schedule. And it made it very challenging to get some of the nuances of the bills together in a timely way. But what I will say is our technology support in the legislature is amazing. They were able to come together. They made an early decision to be dedicated to this virtual environment for session, and it went off amazing. And the way that we were able to get people from all over the state to be able to participate in hearings was nothing short of historic. Normally people have to drive to Olympia to testify on bills. And so we had record numbers of people signing up in order to have their voices be heard on various pieces of legislation. So I'll pass it over to my teammates. I guess my one hope moving forward is I'd like to keep a little bit of the virtual so that, we can maybe go back and forth a little less and have the opportunity to talk to more folks from around the state.
I'll jump in and follow up. Liz, you put that quite well. There were some great opportunities and some great challenges. I think one of the things that I really admired also was the amount of people who are able to testify, and the amount of people who are signing in, and the amount of people who actually went into TVW and witnessed and watched the tough work that we're doing each day. I absolutely, the networking that happens between my colleagues and is really important. It was sorely missed, and you could feel it in how we were moving fast and trying to address bills and answer questions. There were some shortfalls and information that normally would have been shared by me running down to the aisle and talking to a colleague, or running across the hallway and waving at Liz and having Liz bring her colleagues over, and we would talk through an important bill. So, there's some good and bad. For me, I move quite fast anyway. So running from one Zoom to the next Zoom to the next Zoom every 15 minutes for 12 to 13 hours a day worked quite well for me. But then again, it also got very tiring. I'll be honest with you guys. There were days when, I didn't leave my little house for 3 or 4 or 5 days. I didn't see another person. Behind me, I probably had a couple deer and some birds visiting me, and that was the extent of my outreach to any human being. I think the poor guy at the grocery store just wished that I wouldn't talk so much and hug him as I went to grab my groceries Sunday night at 10 o'clock. It was tough, but I signed up for it. I loved every minute. I couldn't have done it without Alex calling up and making sure, hey, are you okay? Liz sending me a text to say, hey, we got this. We really helped each other through some really tough times, and we really laughed really hard when we needed the laughter to uphold us. So it was a good session. I too, Liz, I hope we keep some of this virtual session. I think it was really helpful for the state. I think we got a lot more input from our Washington citizens, and I think we can make it work. So I'll turn it over to Alex.
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything you both have said. I guess I would just add a couple of other little observations. One thing we couldn't do was work as late into the night as I think we have in previous years, because if somebody falls asleep, you've got no way to wake them up. If they fall asleep on the floor, somebody's there with sharp elbows. But and that's pretty common if we're working to 2 a.m. But we could not do that this year. There's just no way to get to them. I would also highlight that one of the changes that happened. I joined the House Democratic Caucus leadership team this year. I was elected as deputy whip, and usually the deputy whip and other deputy officers are not invited to be part of the team. And part of the reason for that is just because the meeting room that the leadership team meets in only has so many chairs, and it's only so big. And they were able to expand the table because that limitation doesn't exist. And so that was good for me. It was also, I think, really valuable because 2 of the other deputy officers who were able to join the House Democratic Caucus leadership team were women of color. And so we're able to expand representation and inclusion in part because of that. So that's something that I hope that we're able to hold on to. And I guess the last thing I'd just say, and it's really a big win, is that nobody got sick as a result of the legislative session this year. Nobody got COVID. And that's true for legislators, that's true for our staff, that's true for the stakeholders who come and visit us. And that is not the experience that's happened in most of the other legislatures that have tried to meet during the last year. Both Idaho and Oregon during our legislative session had serious outbreaks of COVID. And so I think we made the right decision. It was all of us learning a lot of new digital communication techniques on the fly, but it was the right choice. And I think it by and large was a success.
Great, thank you so much. The next question was also pre-submitted live from Jamie. For each of you, what is the best legislation and the worst to have come out of this session?
I guess I'll lead off again here. So I had one bill of my own that made it out this session, awaiting the governor's pen, which has to do with clarifying and expanding a tax exemption to create community-based farm worker housing around Washington state. So that's a bill I'm really proud of. It had bipartisan support in the Senate in order to get it amended to a place where it had the potential to be meaningful, particularly in rural areas that tend to be fairly spread out in the kind of relationship between where the farm is located and where the communities are located. So proud of that particular piece of legislation for myself. As far as the worst, that's kind of a mixed bag question because, there's a lot of bills that we hope would have maybe been more progressive because this is a fairly progressive delegation. There's some bills that maybe we wish we would have had one particular caveat in there or another. I will say one of the hardest bills for me had to do with the Blake decision and the way that we choose to handle small quantities of personal possession of narcotics. I hope that bill continues to, or that Supreme Court ruling, as strengthened by the bill, continues to move through this process till we get to a place where we're no longer incarcerating people for small possessions of drugs. But that's the beauty of the way that the legislature works. Like, we go through this big hustle to get bills passed, and then we have this long period of implementation where we have the opportunity to really monitor how things are going, the progress. Are the bills being implemented in the way which we had hoped them to be, or in the spirit of the intent section of any particular bill? And that's what's great about having continuity and leadership, is that we have the opportunity to be at the table to watch those bills as they progress over time.
So I'll jump in. For me, I think the bill, and I'm going to do two, but the bills that sort of pair with each other that I was perhaps most excited on were to pass a capital gains tax and couple that with the working families tax credit. Washington State's got an upside down tax code, meaning the people who make the least pay the most, and the people who make the most pay the least. And it's not fair and it's not right. We didn't fix that entirely this year, but we did for the first time, and it's been a decade-long process. We were able to pass a capital gains tax on sale of extraordinary assets like stocks and bonds. And we're dedicating that money to our state's top priorities, things like early childhood education and K-12 education. And then at the same time, and in fact, in the Finance Committee the same day, we were able to pass a working family tax credit. And what that means is that we all pay sales tax, but for folks who are at the bottom of the economic ladder, they'll be able to qualify for an annual sales tax rebate, depending on the size of the family, between $650 and $1,000 for folks in Washington. So really working to start to rebalance our tax code. That was exciting for me. That's work that we've badly needed to do. There's more to do, but it was exciting to see progress and really to see a shift as folks are starting to agree that it's a problem, and not just that, we should think about tax policy as how do we have money to do the things that are priorities for the state, but really thinking about tax policy as a way to advance equity in Washington. And then I guess, for the thing I was least excited about or most disappointed by, I'd say I had introduced a bill called the Healthy Homes, Clean Buildings Act to try and develop a plan, a 30-year plan to move our state away from burning fossil fuels as a way to heat our buildings and heat hot water. It's one of the biggest unmet parts of our climate crisis, and Washington State's got an opportunity to be a leader. Unfortunately, that bill did not get all the way through this process this year. I think we have gotten some of the pieces included in the budget, and we're going to keep working on it. So not giving up, but that was a little bit of a disappointment.
And I'll jump in real quick. When we all first started running, and Liz as a city council member knew this, we knew that housing was a big critical issue. You throw a pandemic on top of that, and our housing crisis just blew itself out of the water. I think we did a great job in both the Senate and the House on addressing the housing and eviction reform. This pandemic made an already critical situation. I mean, we were listening to folks in the Skagit, in Whatcom, just the tear-felt messages that came from our communities. We already couldn't find a place to live, and now we were losing our jobs, and now we're not going to be able to pay our rent. And where are we going to go? And what are we going to do? And what are my children going to do? And how am I going to feed them? And our food banks didn't have food. We really, our colleagues who worked really hard in the housing eviction area, Representative Macri, Representative Cooter, they blew themselves out of the water in the work that they did. The policies and the investments put in place this session provides a smooth off-ramp to transition away from the moratoriums and prevent a tsunami of evictions. Without the reforms passed this year, people are at a greater risk of being evicted, becoming homeless, and having their lives put into jeopardy as the pandemic continues. Thank you for Senate Bill 5160, protecting tenants and supporting landlords. This bill created a first in the nation, of course, Washington State did this, a first in the nation statewide right to counsel, ensuring low-income tenants have access to a free court-appointed attorney to help them navigate the complex legal processes. A House Bill 1236, the just cause eviction, requires the landlord to provide a good cause for evicting a tenant. Landlords must provide a good reason to tenants when they can ask them to move out of their home. I don't know about you, Alex, but I still hear the comment from the other side that we heard at, 2 o'clock in the morning when we heard this bill. I wasn't going to comment on this, but this is a long debate over this bill in the House. And then House Bill 1277, Eviction Prevention Housing Stability, establishes a $100 surcharge to funding housing services and eviction prevention service to strengthen Washington's housing safety net. Many of you may think, oh, it's just a little $100. The funding that's provided goes a long way, and we know that we need to continue to provide it. There's some other great work that's been done in the housing section that I'm really excited about. You know, one of the bills we talked about that I think we can do more on, and that's going to need a lot more work. And I'll just be honest. I had a really incredible time working on climate change during this session. Financial climate change. It was an incredible ride on what I learned in the past year. I think the Climate Commitment Act did well. It did what it was supposed to, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done there. We got a big bite out of climate change, but we need to do more. We need to hold the policies accountable to our communities of color. We need to make sure that when we implement this bill, that we implement it right. I think it's a bill that's a first step and a bold step, but we got more to do. So that's something that I don't think it's the worst part. I just think that we have more that we can do together. And I love the fact that Alex and Liz and I are three people who are sitting at that climate change table, making a big difference and making your voices heard. So I'll go back to Courtney.
Great, thank you all so much. And on that note, we had another pre-submitted question. Can you talk more about the Climate Commitment Act and other environmental budget and policy priorities that passed this year?
I can jump in there. So the Washington State has been struggling to figure out how to respond in a systematic way to climate change for a long time. And we haven't gotten the ball I'm not good at sports metaphors. We haven't gotten very far with it. This year we had sort of an embarrassment of riches, right? Because there was a Washington Strong Act, there was the Climate Commitment Act, there was another bill introduced sort of later in the session, and I'm here to confront the climate crisis, and it's important to me. And I co-sponsored all of them and signed on and said, yeah, I think that would be better than not doing anything. And I think it's important for us to kind of start from where we all agree. There's differences between these policies, but we all agree that climate change is an urgent crisis. And we all agree that it's caused by people and that we need to take action and that Washington should be a leader. We all agree that the polluters should be paying for the pollution, and we agree that the money that's raised from doing that should be invested in solutions, and that those investments should start in the communities that have contributed the least to climate change, the communities that are being hurt the most by climate change. There are a lot of other details, but those are pieces that we do all agree on. And there's going to be more to do as the Climate Commitment Act moves forward. We're not done legislating on this. It's going to require some cleanup work and some rulemaking to implement the process. But what I would really highlight, and ultimately the reason that I wanted to vote for that bill, is because it's a cap on climate pollution, and that cap is based not on an arbitrary number that we negotiated between legislators and we went with the worst, what does it take to get the minimum number of votes we need to pass. We set the cap last year when we set a goal based on science. And the legislation says the Department of Ecology is going to put that cap at a level that helps us reach that goal steadily. And to me, that was one of the most important pieces of that bill, and something that I didn't take my eye off of. So there's, like I said, more work to be done, and not everybody will agree on it, but I think it is an important step in the right direction.
And I just follow up to say, Washington Strong was a really incredible experience. We talked to people around Washington State about what the potential problems that we could solve by implementing carbon pricing. And I am proud of the relationship that work has with the Climate Commitment Act and where it drove the final policy as it left the House to come back for concurrence in the Senate. We got a lot of added protections around communities of color, frontline and fence line communities across Washington State, rural areas that are often left behind as a result of climate policy because of the sheer, geographic and, on the ground circumstances that happen in different places around our state. But we also made record investments in the Department of Natural Resources to deal with our wildfire responses, reforestation efforts, and more. We were able to have a phase out plan for hydrofluorocarbons, which are refrigerants. So things that we kind of take for granted, but are actually one of the top greenhouse gas emitters in the world, is just, the AC units that we pull out of our homes and out of our cars, out of our appliances over time. Now there's better technology and we have better recycling programs. So that's going to make a huge impact moving forward on what Washington State is emitting. We were able to make huge progress on plastics and recycling, on working towards more soft shore armoring possibilities for landowners across Washington State as they take out hard armoring to allow for forage fish to help our orca. And speaking of our orca, we were able to get through the Quiet Sound Initiative, which is being run out of the maritime sector, championed by myself and Representative Lekanoff in each chamber, to start working towards having our ferry system and our maritime sector working in harmony with our native whale populations so that they can continue to thrive. So many great bills were passed this session, and I'm proud of the work we got done.
We did. Hey, team, I was just counting up the bills through our notes. We got 11 bills that are related to climate change and to the environment. We talked about the Climate Commitment Act, which was Senate Bill 5126. We got the low carbon fuel standards. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but I think it took 4 sessions to get that through, which really is the adoption of clean fuels, finally addressing the biggest contributors to carbon pollution, fossil fuels. We got the famous HEAL Act that was passed in 2018, turned into a proviso. Agencies sat down. The HEAL Act is really a healthy environment for all. It really is addressing frontline workers. We got electric vehicles, House Bill 1287. And Alex and Liz probably know that we're also working with Mayor Bordeaux to put a electrical car parking lot in Mount Vernon for 75 plugins. It'll be the largest electrical car plug-in parking lot north of Seattle. So we're working on that. Our community forest, Liz, was House Bill 1216. Alex, you get so many kudos. Like if I could send you a dozen cookies for working with Representative Dye on House Bill 1117, urban heat island effects, which really takes a look at the urban areas and how to reduce the climate change impact from all the heat coming out there. If you guys want to do something fun, call Alex and have him tell you about that bill. He really did great on working in a bipartisanship with the other side. You're right, Liz. I can just feel Commissioner France hopping up and down with so much happiness to get House Bill 1168, the Forest Health and Wildfire Mitigation, through. Streamlining the permits for salmon recovery. Representative Theringer myself and Representative Fitzgibbon met with tribal leaders, and we talked about how important it was to streamline permitting for salmon recovery, and that we needed to get that done to return the salmon home. Really, really great work we did there. Thank God we're getting rid of styrofoam. Liz and Alex, we cannot see any more styrofoam in our capital down in Olympia. We have to shake the finger at that. And then tax exemption deductions for salmon recovery and habitat restoration projects, Senate Bill 5220. And then the bill for replacing shoreline armoring is Senate Bill 5273. 11 bills. When we go through our notes, Liz and Alex, you can see like all the bills that were highlighted. Climate change and energy had some of the most bills, and those weren't even the ones, like those are the ones that passed. We couldn't even go through all the ones that people are rolling up their sleeves and getting ready for 2022 to work on. So back to you, Courtney.
Awesome. I love hearing about all these bills. The next question we've got here is live from Facebook. Kathy wants to know what the state is doing to fund services and housing for individuals experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, that had to be an issue that was top of mind for all of us this year. As I think Debra mentioned before, going into this legislative session, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Folks have been out of work. It hasn't been safe for folks to go to work. There were 250,000 people behind on their rent, who, if we did not have an eviction moratorium in place, would be facing eviction and facing homelessness. And of course, that eviction moratorium isn't going to last forever. So our first priority had to be and was preventing new instances of homelessness, preventing people from losing their homes. And because of leadership that came from the Democrats in the federal government and the recovery bill that was passed, there's money to be able to support helping folks get caught up on that rent, folks who are behind on their rent because of the pandemic. And we were able to dedicate about $1 billion to that homelessness prevention work. And then, as Debra had mentioned, coupling that with making sure that tenants have a right to legal counsel if they are facing eviction, and making sure that when landlords are going to kick somebody out, that there's a just cause. Because we know that evictions happen disproportionately, and the numbers are really staggering. I don't have the statistics in my head, but they're staggering and they're horrifying. That evictions in Washington state happen disproportionately to people of color. And so those pieces were absolutely essential to get right. But that doesn't go far enough, right? We also have folks who are experiencing homelessness right now. And we made significant investments in building new housing. We made investments in emergency shelter. We made investments in that will be available for local governments and other partners around the state to be able to apply for. We've got investments in a program to acquire existing buildings that are unused or underused, to be able to transition those either to housing or for emergency shelter. And then we invested almost $300 million in the Washington State Housing Trust Fund, which is how we build permanently affordable housing, to make sure that we're not just providing shelter, but we're able to provide that we have homes for people. Because the most important thing, the long-term solution to homelessness is to have permanent supportive housing, so that folks have a place to stay, but are also able to get help with some of the challenges that may have led to them experiencing homelessness in the first place. So those are some of the priorities. And I should mention the last piece there, and Debra already alluded to this, but the document recording fee is permanent funding. that will be, or is a permanent dedicated source of revenue. It's $100 million a year that we'll be able to raise, and is guaranteed to go towards housing and homelessness. So not just this one-time investment because of good leadership from the federal government, but we're now going to have ongoing dedicated revenue to be able to confront this crisis in an ongoing way.
Great. Thank you, Representative Ramel. Next question was also pre-submitted. What happened to GMA reform this year? I saw several of the bills, like 1117 and 1099, didn't quite make it out of the Senate.
No, thank you, Courtney. I'll jump in real quick. We did a lot of great heavy lifting during the interim to be able to look at how can we better address new legislation that can be implemented into GMA. Unfortunately, we were not able to move the bills through the Senate this year. House Bill 1117 was incorporating salmon recovery into the GMA, and 1099 was incorporating climate change into the GMA. We don't believe it wasn't the fact that we just didn't do our due diligence this year and on building the bill. It's just we didn't, as we had cities, counties, environmental communities, tribes all supporting these two bills. It was just a decision of the legislature that made the determination that we needed to do a little bit more work on those two bills and any other future GMA policy moving forward. Hey, we're not disappointed. You know, it just makes it's one more hump that we have to get over. We roll up our sleeves a little bit. We make the table a little bit bigger, and we collaborate and try and find where we fell short, where senators need questions answered on these topics, where representatives might need to dig a little bit deeper. And we just look at 2022 and make a decision to run those bills again. I have great admiration for my partner over on the other side. As Liz knows as well as I do, GMA is a big topic for the 40th. And if we're going to work on GMA, we want to do it right and we want to do it well. So we're just going to roll up our sleeves and make sure we get what's needed done through this next session.
Yeah, and I would just add, we had an interesting combination of committees this year in the Senate. So because of the loss of Senator Dean Tacko, who had chaired the local government committee in prior years, our local government committee was absorbed by our housing affordability committee. And so that meant for a very big plate of work that needed to get done on the Senate side this year. And so GMA being such a comprehensive issue and having such nuances on the ground between places in Eastern Washington versus our more urban counties and across the peninsula. There will be an effort moving forward in the Senate being led by this same committee that I am very much looking forward to digging in on. We have our local areas of more intense rural development like we see around Orcas Island and other places around Skagit County that have really provided a lot of interesting conversations at the community level about the future of land use. And I will just tack on one thing I'm very excited about is that this year again, and hopefully it won't be vetoed for budget reasons this time around, but we were able to get an operating budget request to do an initial groundwater analysis for the San Juan Islands and for Guimas in order to be able to better forecast what growth allocations should look like over time. So I'm very pleased that that money was included in the operating budget and look forward to it being passed when the governor signs the budget into law.
And can I just take 1 second and really hold up Debra's work on the salmon bill? That has been, I know, a labor of love, but it's an idea that was new. And last year, everybody said, "What is this idea? What is this net ecological gain? What does that even mean?" And then, it didn't pass last year. This year, she came back with it. It had support from local governments and had support from much more of sort of the stakeholder community. Not everybody, but not everybody's going to agree on things. But the idea was clearly well thought through, well worked. She spent the year really getting the idea out there. And so I feel confident that another year's worth of work like that, and we will be able to pass it in the future.
I want to second that, because getting the Association of Washington Cities and the Association of Counties to come together and be not just neutral, but pro on a bill like that, when you're looking at a statewide organization that represents so many different kinds and sizes of communities across Washington state, really, it was a monumental lift. And I look forward to continuing this collaboration to help it make it through next year.
Hey, this is what makes us a great team. Thanks, guys. I'm sitting up a little straighter.
Great, thank you all. This next question is live from YouTube. Dana was wondering, what is your opinion of the efforts made this session to restrict voting rights in Washington?
I don't think we passed any bills that restrict voting rights in Washington. In fact, we expanded voting rights in Washington. I know that in other parts of the country, there's been a push to restrict voters' access to their constitutional right to vote. That's not going to go anywhere in Washington while Democrats are in charge. What we were able to do this year that I think we should all be excited about and proud of is restore voting rights to everybody convicted of a felony who's finished, who's done their time, who's paid the penalty and is is a member of society again. That's about 20,000 people who currently didn't have voting rights. And what we know from data is that when you invite people back into civic life, it makes them less likely to return to the crime that may have gotten them in trouble in the first place, because we don't need to punish people by restricting voting rights. So we've actually been able to expand them this year, unlike the direction, unfortunately, that some other states are headed.
Great, thank you, Representative. The next question we have was also pre-submitted. Sorry, my computer is loading here. This next question is about police reform in Washington state. We had someone write in and ask, Black and brown communities have been disproportionately victims of excessive force and police violence. Going into this legislative session, racial justice and police reform were major priorities. What legislation was adopted this year to address public safety and police accountability?
Thanks for that question, Courtney. I'll jump in real quick. You know, coming out of the 40th, we had a couple different platforms of what we needed to get done on public safety. I served on the House Public Safety Committee with communities of color, and we looked at over 65 different bills this year that addressed public safety reform. You know, communities across the state, the trust between law enforcement and the people they serve was broken because lives continued to be shattered by officers who abused their powers. You know, we worked on these bills because we needed to ensure that the public safety is experienced equally for every community. You know, we wanted to build safe and healthy communities in Washington state. That's what we're all about as lawmakers. We pushed hard on each other. We said, hey, we must continue to push our criminal justice system towards equality and equity at every level. You know, sitting with my colleagues, whether it was Representative Entenman, Senator Dingra, Senator Peterson, Representative Goodman, Representative Lovelett, Representative Johnson, we said, hey, we need to adopt policies this year to address law enforcement training, oversight, data collection. We focused on the use of force, independent investigations, and so many other reforms. There are several bills that I'm just going to run through quite quickly. So be patient, my friends. You know, Senate Bill 5051 is a state oversight. It creates timely and effective enforcement of state standards for law enforcement officers. House Bill 1267, independent investigations, that mandates the independent investigation on the deadly use of forces, custodial deaths, and other officer-involved incidences. There's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 other bills that we also covered under data collection, law enforcement audits, The use of force, establishing a civil standard for peace officers' use of force was really important. Law enforcement arbitration, which improves transparency, professionalism, and equitable arbitration for law enforcement, collective bargaining, and something I think that really fits home for us. I've seen community engagement being done in Mount Vernon by the Mount Vernon Police Department and doing it well. I've heard from Bellingham citizens, community engagement is so important. We need to be holding each other accountable. Senate Bill 5353's community engagement creates a partnership model that facilitates community engagement with law enforcement. If we're going to be looking at public safety reform, we need to hear from our communities as they know what they need to take care of one another and keep them safe. Now, we're not done in the public safety arena. We've got even more to do. We're excited to roll up our sleeves and take a look at next year's bundle of public safety policies and laws that we want to invest in to make sure that our community here in the 40th and across the state is feeling safe, feeling equitable, and knowing that every person's life matters. And I know there's been a lot of work done on the Senate and a lot of work done in the House, but I have to tell you, it was hard debates. But at the end of the day, I think making sure that Washingtonians were safe was really important, making sure our police officers knew that we believe in them, and making sure that we have a change in Washington State was our priority. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Representative. This next question was pre-submitted, but we're seeing it in our live comments as well. Can you talk a little more about the transportation budget? Specifically, how did the Washington State ferries fare? And can we expect an electric ferry for the San Juans?
I'll start out with that. So there's kind of two pieces to the transportation budget. This session, we were able to pass our supplemental, which is just continuing to connect up our projects around the state and keep our operating budgets for Washington Department of Transportation alive and well. And then we are anticipating a potential special session coming up in the coming months to do a much larger and more robust transportation package that will then be able to incorporate future revenues from the Climate Commitment Act and incorporate issues around the low carbon fuel standard. So as far as the ferries went, I was really pleased this year to put even more backbone in the Ferry Legislator Caucus. I chair it in the Senate. Representative Paul chairs it in the House. Representative Ramel has been at all of our meetings to help us with this important work, making sure that we are capitalizing vessels, that we're continuing our commitment to not only hybridizing our fleet over time, but ensuring that our onshore infrastructure matches the needs of the boats as we move forward, and that we're continuing to capitalize vessels at a rate that doesn't put us in a position to have disadvantage around deferred maintenance. We have some very aged vessels in our fleet. We need to be retiring them in a much more timely manner, so we're not throwing a lot of capital at vessels that we're trying to kind of limp along to keep the fleet together. And continue to have more vessels over time. So if we're putting together a more robust financing strategy using not only some one-time money from the federal government, but also looking at ways that we can commit new dedicated revenue streams towards that end. As far as an electric ferry for the San Juans, we've talked a lot about that. Part of the challenge is that we have a fleet to maintain that doesn't necessarily have any one vessel living in any one particular run. So we need to make sure that our vessels are able to be compatible across the system. But the electric ferry I'm excited about is coming to Guaymas Island. We made a lot of progress on the county ferry, working to capitalize our county road administration board, which also does some integral vessel capitalization. But we were able to get some onshore financing money put together for the Guaymas Ferry, some capital in the Forward Washington package to secure the vessel development, and another bill that helps us with our request for proposals on ensuring that proprietary information around electrifying that ferry is kept intact so that we can work on building an incredible vessel for our county runs. We know that Lummi Island is going to need one soon as well, and maintenance of those county runs will be important moving forward.
Great, thank you so much, Senator. So it looks like we're almost out of time here, so we're going to close it off with one more pre-submitted question. This person asked, progressive revenue was a hot topic this year. What are your thoughts on capital gains and some of the other progressive revenue proposals that were passed or introduced this session?
I'll lead off. So as Alex was talking earlier with our upside down tax code, we know that our lowest income folks are paying around 17% of their total income in the form of taxes to the state. And people that are far higher up on the wealth ladder are paying in the 2 to 3% amount for their total net worth. There was another bill that didn't make it through this year, but I'll be curious to see. It's a story arc, which has to do with taxing people's assets above $1 billion in Washington state. As you can imagine, that targets a very small handful of people, but brings in the neighborhood of $2.2 billion annually. So there is a lot of untapped affluence in our country, in our state, that I think has the obligation to pay their fair share to balance out what is happening in our lower income folks' pocketbooks. I think that capital gains was historic. I want to give a specific shout out to Senator Tawana Nobles, who joined our caucus this year and was that 25th vote that we needed to get it out of the Senate. And so I am very pleased that we were able to move that bill through this year. As we move forward, it's important to keep in mind that it's not enough to bring in revenue, that we need to balance that with cuts that benefit low and middle income households across Washington. And I think that all of us are dedicated to a continued effort to have our tax code reflect working people in our state, middle income people in our state, seniors who are on a retirement income in our state, folks that are really living paycheck to paycheck in our state. And that's the majority of people. And we can continue to work forward. There is a report coming out from our tax revenue group that's supposed to be due in the next year or so that is going to give us a blueprint for how we can continue to do this work. And you have 3 champions in the 40th that are dedicated to progressive revenue and tax reform on the whole.
Great, thank you so much. And it looks like that's all the time we have for questions this evening. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in, and thank you for everyone who was submitting questions live or before the event. If we didn't get to your question tonight, you can always reach out to your lawmakers. Their contact information will be on the screen here in a moment. But first, we'll turn it back over to the lawmakers for some closing remarks.
Well, I'll keep it short and sweet. Liz and Alex, I got to tell you, those times when I was lonely and I didn't see so many people and you guys shot me a text, shot me a call, checked in on me. I really want to thank you. This session was phenomenal and I couldn't have had a better team to be able to work with. I absolutely love it. And I was teasing, and this is for all of you out there in Zoom world, in Facebook world, because I was all ready to go to the gym. I was all excited and I got on Zoom. I was in my running clothes and Alex was handsome in his suit. Liz had a beautiful blazer on, so I had to run and put something nice on. The nice part about the legislature being over on Sunday is we're able to get back into our lives a little bit of taking care of ourselves health-wise, running, planking, Alex, doing our yoga, Liz, and taking care of our little ones and our families. And so just a couple things. Thank you to my team. Thank you to my community for always making sure that I matter and you let us know. And don't forget to mask up, get your vaccination, and get outside and get some exercise. So short and sweet, Liz.
Well, I hope you all can see why I love working with Debra and Liz so much. It is a pleasure and honor to get to serve alongside two people who share so many of my values and passion, and I think we complement each other well in terms of skills and focuses. And I believe that alongside our partners up in the 42nd district and the 10th district, we're able to really represent this region and spread out and make sure we have coverage on all the financial committees and making sure all the topic areas are covered. I joined the leadership team this year, and one of the things I really wanted to understand as deputy whip is like, why do bills fail? Like, why do ideas that I think are popular, that I think make sense, why don't they succeed? And the answer is a little bit less exciting than you might think. It's not so much about palace intrigue or so-and-so doesn't like so-and-so. It really just comes down to what there is time to do on the calendar. We've got 105 days and everybody is working every one of those days. And you run out of time for things. You run out of time on the calendar for a committee, you run out of time on the calendar for the floor. But I think this year, I feel proud and excited to share back with the community what we did with the time that we had. And looking forward to continuing some of the projects that we didn't quite get across the finish line, knowing that we can come back next year a little bit more ready to go, a little bit, with a bit more momentum and renewed commitment. So really appreciate the opportunity to share back with the community. And I would just wrap up and say thank you again, especially to our staff. Courtney, thanks for managing us today. But I know Jordan and Amanda and Kaylee are all keeping an eye on us right now, and just want to say thank you again to all of you for your help over the last few months managing everything that we've been able to do. Liz?
Thank you, and just so glad to be part of this team. Like we've mentioned before, we really do try to come together and harness our strengths and figure out how to cover any of our weak spots. We are obviously a very climate-focused delegation, but I think we are rooted in human rights and justice and the idea that our communities come to us with a vision of how they want to be represented. And at the end of the day, it is our job to bring that vision and that leadership to Olympia. And I feel very proud to have delivered on so many of those ideas and to have had the incredible collaboration that we have with grassroots organizations from across our district, individual folks who have their eye on maybe it's a particular piece of the budget, or maybe it's a particular issue that is on the ground and very near and dear to their heart that they bring to us and we're able to act on, or just the budget provisos that come across our desks and we go through this mad flurry of activity to see what we can get into the budget to make sure that our communities are benefiting from their participation in the taxes of our state. And I feel like we delivered a lot, but as always, it's a long arc of getting work done, and we will come back year after year renewed to continue with the work. And just want to encourage you all to reach out over the interim. The pace of session, if you haven't gotten from all of our accounts, is very frantic, and usually by that point we're already moving bills that we've been working on for months and months prior to this point where they finally make it to prime time. So I just appreciate over the interim when you bring me your great ideas with your questions, and I would just like to second that shout out to our incredible staff, to Jordan and Kaylee and Amanda, who are the folks that answer the phones every day with your needs and help elevate your concerns to us so that we know what needs to be acted on. So thank you for taking part in democracy tonight. As always, we benefit from having an incredibly active district, and I look forward to continuing our collaborations over time.